Next on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, is Maharashtra, home for digital transformation. Our next dignitary is a director at McKinsey's Mumbai office and supports clients in our infrastructure, public sector, EPNG practices. He is a member of the McKinsey Global Institute Council and advises MGI on research related to urbanization in India and Southeast Asia. In his 18 years with McKinsey, he has worked closely with major energy and infrastructure companies in India and across the world. He specializes in transformations and turnarounds of industrial companies. Over the past decade, he has helped over 10 such companies achieve significant sustained performance improvement. He spends significant portion of his time on public policy work in India. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Shirish Sankhe. Joining him is a lady who's a partner with McKinsey Global Institute, McKinsey's business and economics research arm. She joined MGI in 2011 and leads teams on global as well as Indian themes. Her recent research has founded and focused on labor markets, gender economics, economic development, and technology. Anu Madgavkar. Good morning. All yours, sir and ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for inviting us. Both Anu and I are delighted to be here. And we are going to talk about something that Saurav mentioned that probably should not be talked about, which is the macro situation, before we go into the micro, on-the-ground difficulties as well as encouragements that you will face. And as you know, I don't know whether Dhanpal I'm supposed to say it, but the Chief Minister was supposed to be here, so we had also taken a little bit of a step back to say, what does a state or a central government needs to do to really get this whole thing going? Of course, you have a very, very important role to play. As we look at sectors, the startup sector and perhaps the solar sector are two of the few sectors that are really gaining momentum, and there is quite a coldness elsewhere. Eventually, it will thaw out, we hope. But what you are doing is a very, very important part of what we are going to talk about as well. And Saurav did allude to that. So what I'm going to speak about is based on two pieces of work. And you will see lots of data charts in a typical McKinsey way. But it's based on two pieces of work. One piece of work we did around 2 years ago, which is based on how can India eliminate poverty. Because it was not just about economic growth. How can we get to more or less 0% poor people? Okay, that was, and in 10 years. Okay, so the work was based on that. So it was not just about how can India grow at 8%, 9%, 10%. It was focused on poverty because it is a very important aspect to focus on. And we all talk about economic growth. We don't talk about poverty as much. So therefore, we focused on poverty. Surprisingly, you will see actions are similar, you will come to that. And the second piece of work we did was on disruptive technologies, which perhaps some of that will be quite interesting to you directly, right? And Anu led that work. That's why she's here with me on the stage. In fact, the first piece of work was done by me and Anu, and the second piece of work, which is the disruptive technology, was done by Anu. So in typical McKinsey way, you'll see a lot of charts, data analysis, but I will be brief, okay? So the three messages that we are trying to give here is that it is possible to bring India's poverty levels down to less than 10%, and this will, I'll define what those are, or the extreme poverty close to 0% in 10 years, okay? And it actually does not require 10% economic growth. Even at 8.5% economic growth, you can do it. So that's first. And we will talk about the four themes that are essential to drive this transformation. And I know that the theme of this particular conference is also transformation. So India's transformation and technological transformation is what we'll be talking about. And then there are 12 disruptive technologies that can help India leapfrog. Because if you go in the usual way, many of these things actually are not possible or will take too long, right? So what's our performance on poverty, right? Actually, our performance on poverty has been reasonably encouraging, and this is defined as extreme poverty. If you see the number 22%, it's 22% of the people living under what we call the extreme poverty line, right, which is around 800 rupees per capita per year, right? So that is how we define as extreme poverty, right? And this has been a quite encouraging trend. The problem with this is that extreme poverty is not perhaps the right definition to look at. And I'm not trying to get into what is the right definition of poverty and so on, but we said that you need to look at a set of people that will allow them to actually escape the poverty. So therefore we defined, and in this picture sort of suggests that, of course, left-hand side, it's very clear for you that is a poor person. But the right-hand side, which perhaps is your driver, is he poor? Is he slightly better than poor? Our definition, and you'll see we define something called an empowerment line, which is not just a line, which says that there are almost 56% of India, almost half of India is actually poor. Because even one disruption to this guy, if he loses jobs for 3 months, he immediately falls into extreme poverty. One illness in the family is gone, right? The entire income is gone. So therefore, he is also extraordinarily vulnerable. So we expanded the definition of poor to poor and vulnerable. And almost 56% of India suddenly falls into that. So one way to think about it is that half of India is poor. It's very important to think that, because otherwise the extreme poverty definition says only 20% and it will go down to 10%, right? And this is not a definitional issue, I think it's a mindset issue, right? So as we start looking at it to say what does really need to escape these clutches of this new definition of poverty, and then we started looking at 8 elements. Again, I won't go into the details of it, but you just get a feel of it for a minute, right? Food is clear. You need a certain amount of nutrition, right? And especially the right proportion of proteins to micronutrients. Food has been researched well. Like if you take energy, you need clean fuels, right? To ability to cook food without having to collect the firewood that is required, and so on and so on. Housing, drinking water, sanitation, healthcare and education, particularly important. And you will see later that these 2 sectors, if you do it right, especially allow you to escape the clutches of poverty. And the last one is social security or insurance. All these 8 elements need to come together along with a number of free government services to really make sure that a person is empowered or not poor. Okay, so this is just the definition. If you now start taking that definition, as I said, 56% of India is poor, not just 22%. And the number, instead of 800 rupees per capita per month, it goes to 1,300 rupees per capita per month. Okay, so it's around 50% higher income that you require to make sure that you are empowered and not just poor, along with a whole set of government services. Now I'll come to the bottom line, right? So what are the themes that are required to really drive this transformation? How can we as a country, and you as entrepreneurs, make sure that in 8 to 10 years, we can more or less go to single-digit poverty, because 56% of India is poor. If we take that, and this is probably the most important chart of my presentation, part of it was already alluded by Saurav. And this, we were frankly surprised. I mean, on an intuitive level, and I'll explain the chart, on an intuitive level, this may seem already obvious to you, okay? But it was not that obvious to us when we started that if you think about poverty, are the levers or the themes the same? So let me just explain this chart, since this was the most important chart. So we are starting with 56%, which is the left-hand side, which is the number of poor people, right? If you say I want to go to less than 10%, which is the right-hand side, which is the 7% is the population in 10 years. So this work was done in 2012, and it's still very valid. 50% of the impact of this poverty reduction comes from creating those 110 million non-farm jobs in the next 10 years. Okay. So 50% of the impact comes from ensuring investment and job creation happens, okay, on poverty, not just on economic growth, right? The other 20%, it's important for you to just keep that in mind, whether you are working in that or not, right? Other 20% comes from agriculture. So 50, 20, 20, 10 is the impact, right? 50% from job creation, 10% from increasing farm productivity, so it's related to agriculture. Maybe, I don't know whether any of you are working in agriculture, but it's a huge area of improvement. The next 20%, which perhaps all of you can contribute in, comes from improving the effectiveness of public spend. India spends $100 billion of free money, right, to eliminate poverty, right? The effectiveness of that, in our own mind, was around 50%, even though Rajiv Gandhi famously said that only 15 paisa go to the poor people. It's not that bad, okay? It's not that bad. It's around 40 to 50% is the effectiveness. But if that goes to 75 and 80%, and both technology as well as perhaps entrepreneurship has a great role to play. So the next 20% comes from improving the effectiveness of public spending, and only 10% comes from increasing the spending. So as you can see, the focus on last several years was increasing that spending, which is good. Nothing wrong with that. But the real levers are job creation, increasing farm productivity, and improving the effectiveness of public spending. Okay, 50, 20, 20, and 10. Okay, that's the impact. I'll spend a little bit of time on job creation, because many people, when they say 110 million jobs, they get a little bit confused where the jobs are. It's a very large number, by the way. Okay, so where are the jobs, right? And I know, again, you have a very important role to play, but the sectors at that level of job creation have to be understood, at least, right? So I'll come to that, okay? 50 million of these jobs have to come from construction. At this stage of Indian economy, 50 million of those 120 million or 115 million have to come from construction. So you have to get housing and infrastructure right, and housing especially. Currently, it's completely, reasonably dead in India, housing, right? But construction, 50 million jobs. And no matter how you analyze it, the numbers come out to be that, okay? So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying you all start working in construction and real estate and infrastructure, but it's important that 50 million jobs of those have to come from construction. Construction we have to get right. The other 30%, somebody mentioned, has to come from manufacturing. And I know there is at least a lot of talk about Make in India as well as ease of doing business, but 30 million jobs come from manufacturing. I think there is some focus, even though huge number of barriers, as you will see. And the other 35 million have to come from services, and all types of services, many of that you are involved in. I'll talk about one particular service which create 10 million of these 35 million jobs. I'll just talk about it. The last point, which again is important for you to just keep in mind at the macro level, that agriculture does not create jobs. In fact, agriculture will destroy 20 million jobs. Nothing wrong with it. All economies thrive on pulling people out of agriculture, right? So eventually, the 50 or 60% people who are working in agriculture will go down to 2 to 5%. And that's actually progress, okay? Even though one way of thinking about it, oh my God, we are destroying jobs in agriculture. It's a good thing, right? So that's the structure, right? I'll just talk about what are these jobs below this, right? Services. One of the biggest job creator, which is not, I think, being focused on in the right way, is tourism, right? 10 million jobs can come from tourism. And we have looked at all types of things. I think there's similar to smart city. I think you need some integrated smart tourism circuits where you can easily go in. I think there's an ease of tourism theme that is required. It's very difficult to travel in India. Okay, if you just travel and enjoy. Okay, and you must have seen that. Of course, I'm not talking about the 5-star hotels, but generally, India has not really leveraged the tremendous tourism potential. We all know that, but at least currently I don't see a huge amount of work on this. But for job creation, it's one of the most important sectors. Okay, so 8 to 10 million jobs is no joke, because out of 115, 10 million jobs coming from a single sector, it's quite important. The second one, as you start going to manufacturing and enterprises, what we find that India's small enterprises, many of them you are involved in, have some of the poorest productivity levels. And this is the number which is in green, which is the value add, which is productivity of small enterprises, right? India is at 1.5, China is at 15.1, right? This is small enterprises productivity, right? So the productivity of small enterprises have to be improved dramatically. Part of it, what you are doing will help, but our small enterprises are incredibly unproductive, okay? The third one, I'm still in the 50% job creation area, right? So let me just make sure that this is working. Will it stop working? Yeah, good. The third one is related to manufacturing. Second one is also manufacturing, but it's related to the industrial clusters. I won't go into that, but we really need to get our industrial clusters and manufacturing clusters going. And the fourth one, there will be some interest in this particular audience, that again, private investment is essential. But our analysis says that PE-backed companies have far higher job creation as well as productivity increases. That is possible, right? So, and maybe that's just a selection effect, but PE has a very important, private equity has a very important role to play in terms of both investment as well as the productivity increase of the companies, both because of the pressure as well as the best practices, right? And then in terms of job creation, there's a whole set of cross-cutting themes. I'm not going to go into that, but you will begin to talk about it here. The first one was administrative ease, which is ease of doing business. I think there is still a lot of lip service on the ground. Not too many things have changed. And the last one, which is tax. Let me spend a minute on this, okay? Because the importance of taxation, and you or somebody mentioned it, not just income tax, but especially taxation, indirect taxation, right? So there's a lot of discussion on GST. Let me spend 30 seconds on the importance of it. When we looked at China, and China introduced GST in the 1990s, okay? And the Chinese, most people say GST is GST. It's not. The most important thing about GST is the rate at which GST is decided. And I'll give you a simple thumb rule because you know GST is coming. If India sets its GST rate as 19 to 20%, it's game over. Despite a GST, you won't get what you want. If India sets its GST at 17 to 18%, you have some benefit, okay? If India sets its GST rate at 15%, there will be an enormous increase that you will see. China reduced its indirect taxation rates from 25 to 27% to 17%, and that was one of the primary drivers of the consumption growth that China saw, okay? So the rate at which GST is set is one of the most important things, and it's not being talked about as much. We just say GST, GST. Just keep that in mind because this drama will unfold in the next 6 months, right? And the government is making the right noises, but let's see where it sets up at, right? Sorry, yeah. We already talked about ease of doing business. I won't go into it. If the chief minister was there, I was going to show him that Maharashtra is 8th ranked, despite the #1 ranked investment destination, 8th ranked in ease of doing business, and a lot needs to be done in Maharashtra in terms of just ease of doing business. I won't go into all the levers, but raising farm productivity, as I said, is one of the most important one. Perhaps not a huge amount of interest to you, but it's good. Just one piece of data. India has the lowest farm productivity. If you look at it, it's 2.3. And all other countries, Thailand, Mexico, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, farm productivity is tons per hectare. Okay, so it's one of the lowest, and a lot needs to be done. We had looked at it in detail. So the other next 20% is agriculture productivity, right? Third one, which perhaps you will have some interest, is effectiveness of public spend. Okay, this, I think it can really be enabled by technology. The government is already talking about direct benefit transfer and so on and so on. Huge opportunity. Because remember, India spends $100 billion every year in this, and with an effectiveness that is very, very low, right? Whether it's in food, NREGA, education, fuel, health, and so on. So again, fantastic opportunity here. Sorry. And we think that huge potential for private enterprises to participate. Many of you may want to stay far away from the government, but eventually, I think this, even now it's a big opportunity, but eventually this will be a pretty big opportunity. How do you give public services in the most effective manner, right? So that was the third one, right, which was the public services part of it. just make sure. I'm having some problem with technology, even though as we go towards the disruptive technology section. Okay. It's getting disrupted. No, it's, I think, up to you. Right? So basically, these were the two sections. India can get to single-digit poverties or almost eliminate extreme poverty. 115 million new jobs. 50% impact, other 20% impact on agriculture productivity. The next 20% is on improving the effectiveness of public spend through either technology, direct benefit transfer, or effectiveness of government services. And the last 10% which we didn't talk about was increasing the spend, especially on healthcare. With this, I would like to hand over to the next section, which is how the 12 disruptive technologies can actually help India leapfrog these barriers.
Thanks, Shirish, and I do hope this technology is cooperative and supports me in this section. But at one level, a lot of the things that Shirish talked about seem a bit daunting and overwhelming, which is there's a hell of a lot of work required, $1 trillion worth of infrastructure to be built, public efficiency to be sort of improved, almost doubled in an environment where that's difficult to achieve. How can all of this actually happen in a country as large as India? The good news is that we feel that the power of disruptive technologies will actually, they have the potential to be a very strong force, a very positive force that can help address some of these challenges and barriers of inefficiency that we face, because of which half of India doesn't really have the living standards that, that they need in order to be, productive workers and citizens. So we at MGI had actually done an unrelated piece of work roughly 2 years ago, looking globally at which technologies have the most power to disrupt business chains and actually create economic impact. It could be economic value added, it could be shifting economic pools from one set of people to another set. But which are these technologies? And we had come up with a global list of 12 technologies. And then friends, family in India, including many of the people in the room, like Atul and others at NASSCOM, Saurabh and others at the National Innovation Council, all turned to us and said, what does this really mean for India? Is this list of globally relevant 12 technologies also the right technologies to think about exploiting to create value in India? And so that was a piece of research that we did in the backdrop of the empowerment challenge that Shirish has actually talked about. The first finding from our work is that there are indeed a set of 12 disruptive technologies very relevant for India. They are slightly different from the list that we had sort of come to globally. So certain technologies like driverless cars, for example, while very interesting, potentially disruptive, didn't have the promise of huge economic impact in a country like India. In contrast, other emerging technologies such as digital identity and digital payments, which are much more sort of accepted and not necessarily disruptive in other parts of the world, have a huge potential for disrupting India. So we came up with this set of 12, roughly 3 buckets. The first is about technologies that are a lot to do with data, the digital core, so to speak, of disruptive technologies. Mobile internet really leads the pack, supported strongly by cloud. Automation of knowledge work, a very, very strong disruptor in future, which will provide a lot of the intelligence that goes into, more sort of cognitive capability being embedded in devices or in technology-related applications and not having to rely on human cognitive ability for everything. So big sort of discontinuity there in terms of automation capabilities. The second bucket of smart physical systems is about how many of these essentially digital technologies can be used to change the world of things. So IoT is clearly up there. Also, all sorts of technologies that will lead to improved logistics, transportation, understanding GIS and sort of geographical resource mapping and planning, and then genomics, which is getting to the heart of the sort of building blocks of everything and really engineering those. And the final set is really about energy-related technologies, both in terms of extraction, as well as in terms of storage and distribution, which can have efficiency improvements as well as actually bring the benefits of energy to a large number of not included people. So this was essentially the list. What is interesting about all these technologies, and we have a subset of them up here, but what is really interesting is that India is at a stage where we are likely to see, we're already seeing rapid penetration of many of these technologies. And in the next 8 to 10 years, we think there is the potential for many of these to be near ubiquitous or so widely prevalent that all sorts of exciting and interesting things happen. Based on looking at the history of, let's say, mobile technologies or PC technologies, which were relatively simple, there is a threshold of adoption or penetration of about 35 to 40% of the population that researchers have found once an economy crosses that threshold, the technology starts being deployed in many ways because the scale of people using them actually open up a lot of opportunities to change the way business is done, to change the way life is lived using those technologies. And we think for many of the, or all of the technologies on our disruptive list, India will cross that threshold and many of them will actually become nearly ubiquitous in the coming decade. What does that mean in terms of what, and one of the factors that will aid this proliferation of technology is, of course, the government's Digital India program. And there's a lot of debate about, I think the components of the program are well conceived, they're quite comprehensive. There's a lot of debate about the pace of rollout and the pace of progress. Our submission would be that even independent of such a program, looking at macro factors like the rapidly declining cost of technology and much more user pull and demand for many of these personalized technologies, you will see rapid penetration with or without Digital India. But Digital India certainly, in the years to come, can provide a lot of momentum and take the power of these technologies to untapped and uncovered areas. First, a macro number, and then some more, perhaps interesting to you, micro examples of how this can pan out. The macro number is very exciting. If you look at the range of potential applications that can be used deploying these technologies, we think that the economic impact of that in GDP equivalent terms or economic value terms can be anything from $500 billion to $1 trillion of GDP in the year 2025. That's an annual figure. So it's a recurring figure, and that's kind of potentially the upside or the additional value generation from using these technologies. Now, this is not the same as the revenue potential or the profit pool potential from these technologies. We've viewed economic impact as what, from an end user perspective, is the total benefit in terms of time saved, days saved, additional output generated, etc., that many, or leakages and wastages which are plugged, that these technologies can actually generate. But of course, who gets how much of that pie, how much the consumer gets, how much is actually paid for to service providers or solution providers, that's something that would still have to pan out. But the overall size of the pie is very considerable. It's 20 to 30% of incremental GDP growth over a 10-year period. So we would argue that it's right up there in line with pulling people out of agriculture and creating the 115 million jobs that Shirish talked about. This is right up there as a potential value creator in pure economic terms for India. Just a few examples of some of the most, I think, promising or exciting applications. At a high level, we looked at 6 different sectors and identified, I think the research which is available talks about some 40 to 50 different applications and sizes, their potential. But I think in financial services, some of the most promising areas include, first of all, just the electronification of government payments. There are some 150 billion worth of government payments which represent 5 to 20% leakage, wastage, or delays in actually reaching or being deployed. That can be plugged. 30 billion of loans could move from the informal economy to the formal economy as some 300 million people now get financially included using some of these digital technologies. here's a very interesting example of disruption that can come. It's like applying the concept of what e-commerce has done for goods to the whole services and labor market economy of India. India is a very unorganized, fragmented labor market. Anybody who has to employ a driver, a cook, or a security guard knows that it's really difficult to know, who to employ and have any control over that process. These technologies are actually already being deployed to create marketplaces for service providers, to create audit trails for payments, to create certification and reputation establishment for these people. So there is a big upside to them, but also a big upside to employers who are involved. Another great example actually comes from the healthcare sector, which I'll talk about, if I can get the page to move. Yeah. So what is so exciting about the deployment of tech in healthcare is that one of the biggest constraints we face is the skills shortage. Even if we have enough doctors and paramedical trained staff, their willingness and ability to work in areas that need them is actually quite low. And you spend 5 to 7 years maybe training up somebody and then find that that person is actually not willing to work in a community that really needs his or her services. The solutions that are already being innovated and rolled out involve a lot of that know-how now being embedded in handheld devices that actually help do door-to-door personal medical and health screening, record that information, use a cloud-based smart app to actually do simple diagnosis, which is relevant in the context of primary and preventive healthcare, have low-cost diagnosis, and then very smart ways of follow-up monitoring and planning. So this is already happening with people who need no more than 8 to 12 weeks of training to actually deploy these solutions. Really quite a disruptive notion as you think about how do you bring primary and preventive healthcare to poorer people. Lots more solutions, even in the spaces of agriculture and infrastructure, which have traditionally been slow adopters and not really sort of benefited from technology. I'm not going to go into each of these, but I would just like to close with this one page or thought, which is to make all of this a reality. We do feel that Digital India has got to be much more than digital government. This is not just about bringing government services to people. This is about creating platforms of technologies, whether they are to do with unique identity, whether they are to do with payments, whether they are to do with simply the channels that transmit data to people. But all of this has to be viewed as a platform for a lot of private innovation to actually ride and fill these unmet needs, address the value hidden in the inefficiencies that we see across each sector of the economy, and really disrupt the marketplace using these technology capabilities. A lot of ecosystem will have to be created for this, but this is the way the potential really will pan out. And it's not just the economy and citizens who will benefit, but I think everyone in this room, actually entrepreneurs, will benefit the most as these disruptive technologies really unlock their power for India. So let me just stop here, and we'd love to have a discussion and take on some questions.
Sure. Like Anu said, if there are any questions to be asked, please raise your hands and we'll probably come to you. All right, the gentleman in the blue. Good morning, sir. Okay, you want to go ahead, sir? All right, please. I'll mediate the questions, my friend. Thank you. Sir, all yours. I'll come to you, sir. Give me a minute.
My name is Prasanna, editor, Green India, Chennai. I want to say that we should strive to put more people into agriculture, not draw them out. And number two, we should try to create really positively smart rural India, not smart cities. Smart cities, this GST, service tax are all inflationary. Don't forget it.
So, ma'am, who wants to take this question and answer it? Thank you for your question, sir. Thank you. And your statement as well.
Yeah.
Agriculture, of course, has to be much more productive. But the fact of I understand that. I always get this emotional reaction that how can you pull people out of agriculture? But just the economic rationale is that the agriculture productivity always lags the modern sector productivity. So unless you pull people out, agriculture productivity doesn't go. So it's just the fact of the economics. I can't do much about it. You have to pull people out of agriculture to get a country forward. That doesn't mean agriculture cannot be modernized, renovated, made extremely productive and made extremely remunerative. Okay, but that's the fact. In terms of smart villages, completely agree. I think smart cities is just the beginning, but as Anu said, and Anu, maybe you want to take this up, there's a whole set of technologies that actually does not differentiate between urban and rural. It doesn't matter, right, where you are. And that's the power of this.
So just to add to Shirish's point, completely agree, sir, that the power of technology to raise productivity, incomes, and economic surplus creation in rural India is immense. It's not just about bringing services to the unmet or the uncovered population, but it's also about using agriculture in things like, precision agriculture. So pilots in India, in states like Tamil Nadu, have shown that a 60% increase in output per hectare can be achieved simply by tracking and optimizing a whole bunch of data-based variables on weather, soil, water, seed quality, and bringing that know-how to farmers. The question of bringing know-how to farmers is similar to the health question. Who is willing and capable to do that? And similar to the healthcare solution that I talked about, there are great examples of community extension workers. We've seen this in Uganda, for example. We have seen examples in India where these community farm extension workers can actually be empowered with a lot of know-how using many of these simple devices, tablet devices that actually allow them to use it in a very intuitive way in local languages and don't involve, 5 years of an agricultural degree before you actually deploy a person in the field.
All right, sir. Okay. The gentleman in blue. Hello, sir. Good morning. All right, ladies and gentlemen, whoever asks the best question gets a gift from us, all right? So you throw a great question, you get a gift, and your gift is you get to take me home. All right, no one's going to raise their hands then. Sir, what's your name?
Satyadeep Rajan, Perpetual Technology Partners. My question is regarding advanced manufacturing and the Make in India campaign. Are these two consistent, and are 30 million jobs in manufacturing a realistic expectation for the country, given what we're seeing in advanced manufacturing and robotics? Thank you.
So completely agree. I think that question is spot on again, and kind of one of those existential challenges. You have to it's like pushing water uphill to create jobs in manufacturing. I think from a macro perspective, even before these disruptive technologies have come sort of very much into play, but even if you look at the last 20 years, the sort of labor intensity of global manufacturing has been coming down, right? So this is indeed something we should think about. We would say the following, that and Shirish, I don't know, you should see if Shirish agrees with me. But I would say two things. I would say there is a component in Make in India which has to be about bringing advanced manufacturing technologies and techniques to India, because manufacturing is it's a globally integrated business. There are global supply chains. There are opportunities to sell globally, but also opportunities to import global products to meet local needs. And unless you are really competitive in terms of cost and quality that suits the need, but unless you are globally competitive, you're just not going to even create output. And for that, therefore, you have to open your doors and minds to everything from 3D printing to, deploying less radical but still technology-intensive methods of managing manufacturing better, which will destroy jobs. I mean, let's be blunt about it. But equally, I do think there is also another component to Make in India, and perhaps in some of the same sectors, as you go through the value chain, there will be elements of that value chain which are more labor intensive, which still, with current labor costs, it may not make sense to automate them completely. So I think the break-evens have to be understood, and we have to really think about a window of maybe 8-10 years, where some elements of those value chains will still make sense to be done in a labor-intensive way. And I think India can get a much bigger share of those as compared to Bangladesh, Vietnam, Nigeria, or a whole bunch of other countries which are already doing that.
Yeah, so I'll get 30-second answer. I think if you just look at the export-import data of India, all types of weirdness happen. Okay, we are importing a whole set of stuff actually which should be manufactured in India. We have a whole set of metals going out and then coming back as finished products manufactured somewhere. You just look at that data and you actually get aghast. And a lot of it is related to taxation structure, which is very important and it is not being talked about sufficiently, and the competitiveness of Indian manufacturing. You know, it takes 4 times the amount per ton to transport in India, okay, from a factory to a port or anywhere else, right? And all that actually can be easily disrupted just with a little bit of infrastructure and so on. So our sense is that while advanced manufacturing will come into being and it will disrupt eventually, okay, and there is a whole set of both labor and assembly level manufacturing, which are currently, and for next 20 years, I see India manufacturing and not really getting from all countries around us. And with China's yuan going up and the manufacturing really slowing down, it's created fantastic opportunity, which you and I are actually not taking advantage of. We're still going to the Vietnams, to the Bangladesh, or sometimes back in the US, but not coming to India. So I'm bullish on the opportunity. I'm not sure whether it will get done because the whole parts of set of chains how to get done there.
All right, thank you so much. Do we have one more question to take? Can we do that? Or are we running out of time, Kritika? One question. So there was a gentleman here who came in first. Sir, good morning. How are you?
Thank you so much. Nishit Desai here. My question was slightly in the same context. We expect that I think manufacturing will take at least 7 to 15 years to take off with all the problems around. In the meanwhile, between 5 and 7 years, automation and robotics is going to displace 30% of the jobs, and other countries will be moving fast forward. At lower cost, they will be able to export. So how do you discount? On the one hand, you created opportunity for employment, but what is the number you expect will be displaced because of importation of cheaper goods, more productive and efficient? And in India, a lot of factories also would be moving towards automation because that's technological changes. So have you calculated anything that what is the discount effect of the whole thing? That was, I think it was extended.
So just again, 30 seconds. We don't believe that it should take 7 to 10 years. At least certain sectors of manufacturing take off. And as we said, the taxation structure is actually it's stroke of a pen. Okay, in the next budget, you can have 10 things done that can enormously start getting manufacturing. Yes, the factories will take 1 to 2 years to come together. So I'm not bullish at all. I think it can be done. Okay, and in our calculation, we have taken a certain productivity effect of technology in. Of course, if it becomes a lot more disruptive than that, then we have to see. But there's a whole set of manufacturing will require labor. Okay, currently, and again, as I said, I'm saying import data, the mobile phone you use is assembled somewhere else, right? There's no reason that it cannot be assembled here. Just as one example, and so on. So there's a whole set of things that can be done today. Today means starting next year, provided we get some of these policies right. You want to say anything?
Just, I completely agree and endorse that view. Having said that, if you look at construction, manufacturing, and services, the 3 big sectors, the biggest bump up or discontinuity in job creation is implicit in the manufacturing number. So construction and services, past history has shown, we all know this, that India can actually create a lot of jobs in both these sectors with a bunch of things, coming together. That challenge is undoubtedly more in manufacturing, but I agree with Shirish that, I think the bunch of things can be done to accelerate. I don't think we should have a 5 to 15 year perspective time frame in terms of our aspiration, because a bunch of things can be done to improve momentum much faster.
All right, we're done with the questions. Thank you so much for this session, Shirish and Anu. Give them a round of applause. I request Mr. Pradeep Udas to come on stage and give both our dignitaries a small token of appreciation from our side. Keep the applause going, come on. Yeah. Energy ain't dipping, all right? Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Have a nice day. Thank you. Thank you.